The first transmission came through at 3:47 hours, cutting through the static-filled silence of forward operating base meridian like a blade through silk. Lieutenant Commander Axel Viper Kowalski was sipping lukewarm coffee when the radio crackled to life, carrying a voice that shouldn't have been there. A voice that had been declared dead 3 months ago. Meridian Base, this is Phantom 77. Request immediate emergency clearance for combat landing. I'm coming in hot with 20 enemy fighters on my 6. The coffee cup shattered against the concrete floor. Every head in the communications bunker turned toward the radio, faces drained of color. Phantom 77 had been Lieutenant Commander Nix Ravencrest's call sign. The same Nix Ravencrest whose F-22 Raptor had been shot down over the contested Karelian Peninsula during Operation Shadowfall. Her aircraft disappearing into a storm of enemy fire and radar jamming that had turned the sky into an electronic graveyard. Negative, Phantom 77, the radio operator stammered, his voice cracking. Your aircraft was confirmed destroyed. State your identity and current position. The response came through layers of static, and what sounded like missile lock warnings screaming in the background. Listen carefully, Meridian. This is Nix Ravencrest, serial number 774 Delta 921. I've been flying dark for 96 days behind enemy lines. I've got intelligence that will change everything about this war. But right now I need you to clear the runway because I'm about to bring 20 very angry Sukhoi Su-35s into your airspace. The bunker erupted into chaos. Phones rang simultaneously as duty officers scrambled to verify the impossible. Colonel Marcus Thunder Harrison, the base commander, burst through the doors, his uniform hastily thrown over a t-shirt. His weathered face carried the weight of losing too many pilots, and Ravencrest had been one of his best. Sir, we're tracking multiple aircraft inbound from the northwest, Radar Operator Tech Sergeant Lima reported, her voice tight with concentration. Lead aircraft is transmitting the correct IFF codes, but the signature is wrong. It's not showing as an F-22. Harrison grabbed the radio microphone with hands that had seen 40 years of military service. Phantom 77, this is Thunder Actual. What's your aircraft type? We're not reading you as a Raptor. The laugh that came through the static was bitter, tinged with exhaustion and something else, triumph. That's because I'm not flying a Raptor anymore, Thunder. I'm flying their prototype. Call sign now officially changed to Ghost Rider. And gentlemen, I'm about to show you what 3 months of survival and a stolen enemy aircraft can do to even the odds. The war was about to change forever. The morning sky over forward operating base Meridian had been painted in shades of amber and rose, the kind of dawn that made even hardened soldiers pause to appreciate beauty in a world torn apart by conflict. But beauty was a luxury, Lieutenant Commander Nix Ravencrest couldn't afford, as she wrestled with the controls of the most advanced aircraft she'd ever stolen. The Sukhoi Su-57 Felon responded to her touch like a predator awakening from sleep. Every surface of the stealth fighter seemed to shift and adapt, its advanced fly-by-wire system compensating for her unfamiliarity with Russian engineering. 3 months of hiding, learning, and preparing had led to this moment, the moment she would either save her fellow pilots or die trying. "Ghost Rider, this is Meridian Tower," came the voice of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the air traffic controller who had guided her home from dozens of missions. "We have you on approach vector 270. Runway is clear, but we're tracking hostiles at your 6 o'clock, 12 miles and closing." Nix's fingers danced across the alien cockpit controls, each switch and display now as familiar as her own heartbeat. The Felon's engines, twin Saturn AL-41 F1s, provided thrust that made even the Raptor seem sluggish by comparison. "Copy, Meridian. Be advised, those hostiles are about to learn why you never chase a ghost into friendly airspace." Behind her, the formation of Su-35 flankers maintained pursuit, their pilots unaware that their most advanced prototype had become the weapon of their own destruction. Squadron leader Viktor Petrov, call sign Burkut, had been hunting the American pilot for 3 months. The theft of their experimental aircraft had been a humiliation that demanded blood. "All units, this is Burkut." His voice crackled through the encrypted Russian communications frequency that Nix had learned to monitor. "The target is attempting to land at the American base. We destroy it on the ground if necessary. Glory to the motherland." The 20 Su-35 spread into attack formation, their Urbisi radar systems painting the base with targeting solutions. Each aircraft carried a full complement of R-77 and R-73 missiles, enough firepower to turn Meridian into a crater. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed the stolen Felon was piloted by someone desperate to escape. Nix Ravencrest wasn't escaping. She was coming home to fight. The base's air defense systems came online with mechanical precision. Patriot missile batteries swiveled skyward while F-16 Fighting Falcons scrambled from the secondary runway. But everyone knew the mathematics of aerial combat. 20 against 1, even with ground support, was a death sentence. "All aircraft, this is Thunder Actual." Colonel Harrison's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Phantom 77 is cleared to engage at pilot's discretion. Meridian defense is at DEFCON 2. The stolen Felon banked hard left, afterburners igniting like twin stars against the morning sky. Nix's voice came through the radio with the calm confidence of someone who had already died once and found the experience surprisingly liberating. "Copy, Thunder. Ghost Rider is engaging. Time to show these boys what happens when you underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. The transformation from peaceful dawn to aerial battlefield took exactly 14 seconds. The first missile exchange began at 30,000 feet, contrails drawing geometric patterns of death across the sky as 21 aircraft danced the oldest and most deadly waltz known to aviation. The war had just changed forever. The missile warning systems in the stolen Felon shrieked their electronic death song as R-77 adders carved through the sky toward Nix's aircraft. She rolled inverted, pulling 8GS as the advanced fighter's airframe groaned under the stress. The Russian missiles, designed to kill aircraft exactly like the one she was flying, passed close enough that she could see their stabilizing fins through the canopy. "Meridian, this is Ghost Rider," she transmitted, her voice strained against the gravitational forces trying to crush her into the ejection seat. "I'm defensive, but not for long. Have your birds hold back. I'm about to make this personal." The Felon's radar warning receiver painted a constellation of threats across her helmet-mounted display. 20 Su-35s, each one flown by a pilot who had trained their entire career to kill American aviators. But they had never faced an American pilot who knew their aircraft better than they did. Squadron leader Petrov's voice crackled through the Russian frequency. "She cannot evade us all. Spread formation and engage from multiple vectors. End this embarrassment." The flankers split into four-ship formations, their pilots executing a textbook multi-axis attack that should have overwhelmed any single defender. But textbooks hadn't accounted for someone like Nix Ravencrest, who had spent 3 months learning to think like a Russian pilot while maintaining the heart of an American warrior. She pulled the Felon into a climbing spiral, afterburners painting twin columns of fire against the morning sky. The aircraft's thrust vectoring nozzles responded to her commands like extensions of her own body, deflecting the engine exhaust to create impossible angles of attack. The stolen fighter danced through the sky with a grace that made even her enemies pause in admiration. "Meridian Base, this is Captain Torres in Eagle 11, came the voice of the lead F-16 pilot, his aircraft racing toward the engagement zone. "Request permission to engage and support Ghost Rider." "Negative, Eagle 11, Harrison's voice was firm. "Maintain holding pattern, let her work." The wisdom of that decision became apparent when the first Su-35 exploded in a fireball that could be seen for 50 miles. Nix had used the Felon's advanced electronic warfare suite to spoof the enemy pilot's missile, causing it to detonate prematurely and take out its own launch platform. The psychological impact on the remaining 19 pilots was immediate and devastating. "Berkut is down," came the panicked Russian transmission. All units, she's using our own weapons against us." The second kill came 30 seconds later, when Nix fired a stolen R-77 missile that had been loaded in the felon's weapons bay. The irony wasn't lost on her. Using Russian weapons to kill Russian pilots while flying a Russian aircraft. But war had taught her that irony was a luxury for those who lived to remember it. The engagement that military historians would later call the dawn of the ghost was no longer a pursuit. It had become a hunt, with the predator and prey roles reversed in ways that would redefine aerial combat doctrine for decades to come. The sky belonged to the ghost now. Captain Elena Frost Volkov had been flying combat missions for the Russian Air Force for 8 years, but nothing had prepared her for watching her squadron leader die in a fireball of his own making. The American pilot in the stolen Felon was fighting with a combination of technical precision and creative brutality that defied every tactical manual she'd ever studied. "All units, this is Frost," she transmitted, assuming command of the shattered formation. "Titan formation. We overwhelm her with volume of fire. She cannot dodge forever." But even as she spoke the words, Volkov knew they were hollow. The pilot in the Felon wasn't dodging, she was hunting. Each maneuver seemed calculated not just to avoid destruction, but to position for the next kill. It was like watching a master chess player who could see 20 moves ahead. The third Su-35 died when its pilot, Senior Lieutenant Kozlov, made the mistake of trying to get clever. He attempted to use his aircraft's supermaneuverability to outturn the Felon in a vertical climb, not realizing that the American pilot had been studying Russian tactics for 3 months. Nix allowed him to gain what he thought was an advantageous position, then used the Felon's thrust vectoring to execute a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible. The stolen fighter seemed to hang motionless in the sky for a heartbeat, then snapped around like a striking snake. A burst from the GSH-30-1 cannon turned Kozlov's aircraft into expanding debris before he could even trigger his ejection seat. "Meridian, this is Ghost Rider." Nix's voice came through the radio with the calm professionalism of someone reporting the weather. "That's 3 down, 17 to go. You might want to have medical on standby. I'm about to make this messy." The psychological warfare was as effective as the physical combat. The remaining Russian pilots could hear her transmissions, could hear the confidence in her voice as she methodically dismantled their formation. Several began to waver, their aircraft pulling back from optimal firing positions. "Hold the line," Volkov screamed into her radio. "She's just one pilot. We are the Russian Air Force." But the Russian Air Force had never faced Lieutenant Commander Nix Ravencrest, who had earned her reputation by turning impossible odds into inevitable victories. The same pilot who had once landed a damaged F-22 on a carrier deck during a storm, who had talked 3 rookie pilots through their first combat mission, while engaging 6 enemy fighters simultaneously. The fourth kill came when she exploited a fundamental flaw in the Su-35 radar system, a vulnerability she had discovered during her months of captivity. By adjusting the felon's electronic signature at precisely the right moment, she became invisible to the pursuing aircraft's targeting systems. The pilot never saw the missile that ended his life. Meridian Base, this is Thunder Actual, Colonel Harrison's voice carried across the radio waves. Ghost Rider, your performance is unprecedented. How copy? The laugh that came through the static was tinged with exhaustion and something darker, the sound of someone who had looked death in the face and found it wanting. Copy, Thunder. I've got 16 problems left to solve and all day to do it. Ghost Rider is just getting started. The war was being rewritten in real time by a woman who had already died once and found the experience surprisingly liberating. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the battlefield that stretched from the Meridian Base to the contested airspace above. From the ground, the contrails painted a story of violence and precision that would be analyzed by military tacticians for decades. But for the pilots still locked in combat, there was only the immediate reality of survival and the growing recognition that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez in the control tower had seen hundreds of aerial engagements, but never anything like this. "Sir," he said to Colonel Harrison, his voice tight with awe, "she's not just defending. She's conducting a symphony of destruction up there." The 5th and 6th Russian aircraft died within seconds of each other, victims of a coordinated attack that showcased the felon's advanced multi-targeting capabilities. Nix had positioned herself above a formation of 3 Su-35s, then fired missiles at 2 targets while simultaneously engaging a third with cannon fire. The precision required was inhuman, or perhaps, Harrison thought, it was the most human thing he'd ever witnessed. "Meridian, this is Ghost Rider." Her voice came through the radio with the steady cadence of someone calling plays in a football game. "I'm going to need you to clear the southern approach vector. Things are about to get interesting." Captain Volkov's voice crackled through the Russian frequency, her composure finally cracking. All units, she's picking us apart. Request immediate reinforcement from Kaliningrad base." The response from her ground control was swift and brutal. "Negative, Frost. No reinforcements available. Complete your mission or do not return." It was the kind of order that defined the difference between Russian and American military doctrine. The Americans would have pulled their pilots back, regrouped, and found another way. The Russians demanded victory or death, with no middle ground for tactical retreat. Lieutenant Commander Ravencrest understood this cultural difference better than most. She had spent 3 months listening to Russian communications, learning their language, their tactics, their psychology. She knew that the pilots still pursuing her were now trapped between their fear of her and their fear of their own commanders. The seventh kill came when she exploited this psychological pressure. Using the felon's advanced electronic warfare capabilities, she jammed the communications between two Su-35s, causing them to mistake each other for hostile targets. The resulting friendly fire incident eliminated both aircraft in a spectacular collision that painted the sky with burning fuel and twisted metal. "Jesus Christ," whispered Captain Torres from his holding position in the F-16. "She's making them kill each other now." The remaining Russian pilots began to spread out, their formation discipline breaking down under the relentless pressure. Some flew aggressively, trying to end the engagement quickly. Others became defensive, more concerned with survival than victory. Both approaches played into Nix's hands. She had learned during her captivity that the Russian military system produced excellent individual pilots, but struggled with adaptive tactics. Their training emphasized following orders and executing predetermined maneuvers, not the kind of creative problem-solving that had become her specialty. The 8th Su-35 died when its pilot, Senior Lieutenant Petrov, the younger brother of the squadron leader who had died first, attempted to avenge his sibling's death. His emotional state made him predictable, and predictable pilots were dead pilots in aerial combat. "Meridian Base, this is Ghost Rider," Nix transmitted, her voice carrying the weight of exhaustion and grim determination. "I've got 13 left. Send word to their families that they died fighting someone who understood their worth as warriors, even if their leaders didn't." The respect in her voice was genuine, and it reached across the language barrier to touch the hearts of the surviving Russian pilots. They were beginning to understand that they weren't just fighting an enemy. They were fighting a legend in the making. The 9th Russian aircraft exploded in a fireball that illuminated the clouds like a second sun, its pilot's final transmission a curse that would have made his grandmother weep. Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Grom, Petrov had been the squadron's youngest pilot, barely 23 years old, with dreams of becoming a test pilot like his hero Yuri Gagarin. Those dreams died at 35,000 feet when Lieutenant Commander Ravencrest demonstrated why the Americans had developed a reputation for producing pilots who could think 3 moves ahead of their enemies. She had used the felon's advanced targeting system to paint him with a radar lock, then fired a missile that wasn't meant to hit him. It was meant to force him into a turn that would take him directly into the flight path of his wingman's own missile. "Meridian, this is Ghost Rider." Her voice came through the radio with the professional detachment of someone reading a grocery list. "Splash 9, 12 remain. They're starting to learn, but not fast enough." Captain Volkov's voice crackled through the Russian frequency, her composure finally beginning to crack under the pressure. All units. New tactics. She's predicting our moves. We must be unpredictable. But unpredictability in aerial combat was a double-edged sword. The 10th Su-35 died when its pilot attempted an unpredictable maneuver that took him outside the envelope of his aircraft's capabilities. The flanker entered an unrecoverable spin, its pilot's last transmission a scream that cut through the static like a blade through silk. In the Meridian Control Tower, Colonel Harrison watched the engagement with the fascination of someone witnessing the birth of a new form of warfare. "Rodriguez," he said quietly, "are you recording all of this?" "Yes, sir. Every transmission, every radar track, every electronic signature. This is going to revolutionize how we train pilots." The 11th kill came when Nix executed what would later be known as the Ghost Maneuver, a combination of thrust vectoring, electronic warfare, and pure pilot instinct that allowed her to appear to be in two places at once. The confused Russian pilot fired his missile at a false target, while the real felon slipped behind him like a shadow. "Meridian Base, this is Captain Torres in Eagle 11, came the voice of the F-16 pilot who had been watching the engagement from a safe distance. "Permission to engage and support Ghost Rider, sir. She's been up there for 47 minutes against overwhelming odds." "Negative, Eagle 11, Harrison's voice was firm. "She's not asking for help, and frankly, I'm not sure she needs it." The 12th Russian aircraft died in a way that would haunt the nightmares of the surviving pilots for years to come. Nix had positioned herself in the perfect ambush location, using the sun's glare to mask her approach. The missile that killed Senior Lieutenant Yakov Smirnov came from an angle that should have been impossible, fired by a pilot who had turned the laws of physics into suggestions. "Meridian, this is Ghost Rider." Her transmission carried a note of something that might have been satisfaction. 10 left. They're bunching up now, trying to use numbers to overwhelm my targeting systems. Time to show them why that's a mistake. The psychological pressure on the remaining Russian pilots was becoming unbearable. They had started the engagement with the confidence of professional soldiers executing a routine mission. Now they were flying against someone who seemed to anticipate their every move, who turned their own tactics against them with surgical precision. Captain Volkov's voice came through the radio, cracking with stress and something that might have been respect. "Unknown American pilot, I am Captain Elena Volkov, acting squadron commander. You have fought with honor. We offer you the chance to surrender." The laugh that came through the static was bitter and beautiful, like the sound of wind through winter trees. "Captain Volkov, this is Lieutenant Commander Nix Ravencrest, United States Navy. I've been dead for 3 months. Dead women don't surrender." The 13th Su-35 exploded in a flash of orange and black that painted the morning sky with the colors of war. Captain Dmitri Hammer Kozlov had been a veteran of the Syrian conflict, a pilot who had survived 200 combat missions and thought he understood the nature of aerial warfare. He learned differently in the 3 seconds before his aircraft disintegrated around him. The missile that ended his life had been fired from a position that violated every principle of air-to-air combat, launched by a pilot who had somehow predicted his evasive maneuver before he had even decided to make it. "Meridian, this is Ghost Rider." Nix's voice carried the weight of exhaustion and something darker, the sound of someone who had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Lucky 13 down, 9 problems left to solve. The remaining Russian pilots were no longer fighting as a cohesive unit. Fear had broken their formation discipline, turning them into individual survivors rather than a coordinated attack force. Some flew aggressively, trying to end their nightmare quickly. Others became defensive, more concerned with living through the next minute than completing their mission. Both approaches played into Nix's hands. She had learned during her months of captivity that the Russian military system produced excellent individual pilots, but struggled with adaptive tactics when their command structure broke down. Their training emphasized following orders and executing predetermined maneuvers, not the kind of creative problem-solving that had become her specialty. The 14th kill came when she exploited a fundamental flaw in Russian tactical doctrine. 2 Su-35s had positioned themselves for a coordinated attack, but they relied on radio communication to synchronize their assault. Nix jammed their frequency at the critical moment, causing them to fire their missiles at empty air while she slipped behind them like a shadow. "Meridian Base, this is Thunder Actual," Colonel Harrison's voice carried across the radio waves. "Ghost Rider, your fuel state must be critical. Are you considering disengagement?" The response came through layers of static and what sounded like missile lock warnings. "Negative, Thunder. I've got enough fuel to finish this dance. Besides, these boys followed me home. It would be rude not to entertain them properly." Captain Volkov's voice crackled through the Russian frequency, her professional composure finally cracking completely. All units, she's not human. No pilot can fly like this." But Lieutenant Commander Nix Ravencrest wasn't flying like a human anymore. She was flying like someone who had already died once and found the experience surprisingly liberating. The stolen felon responded to her commands as if it were an extension of her own body, its advanced systems allowing her to execute maneuvers that would have been impossible in any other aircraft. The 15th Su-35 died when its pilot made the mistake of trying to outfly a ghost. Senior Lieutenant Pavel Orlov had been the squadron's aerobatics specialist, a pilot who could make his aircraft dance through the sky like a ballet dancer. But ballet required predictable movements, and predictable movements were death sentences in aerial combat. Meridian, this is Ghost Rider. Her transmission carried a note of something that might have been sadness. 15 down, 8 left. They're good pilots, Thunder. They deserve better than this. The respect in her voice was genuine, and it reached across the language barrier to touch the hearts of the surviving Russian pilots. They were beginning to understand that they weren't just fighting an enemy. They were fighting a legend in the making. The morning sun had reached its zenith, casting harsh shadows across the battlefield that stretched from horizon to horizon. The contrails painted a story of violence and precision that would be studied by military academies for decades. But for the 8 remaining Russian pilots, there was only the immediate reality of survival and the growing recognition that they were facing something unprecedented. Senior Lieutenant Alexei Volk Petrov, the third brother in a family of pilots, watched his radar screen with the fascination of someone witnessing the impossible. The American pilot in the Stolen Felon was executing maneuvers that violated every principle of aerial combat he had ever learned, yet somehow remained tactically sound. "Frost, this is Volk," he transmitted to Captain Volkov, his voice tight with stress. "She's hurting us. We think we're pursuing her, but she's controlling our positions." The realization hit the remaining pilots like a physical blow. They weren't hunters anymore. They were chess pieces being moved by a master player who could see the entire board. The American pilot wasn't just defending herself. She was orchestrating their destruction with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. The 16th Su-35 died when its pilot fell into a trap that had been set up 3 moves earlier. Lieutenant Commander Ravencrest had used the Felon's advanced electronic warfare capabilities to create a false radar signature, convincing the Russian pilot that he had achieved a missile lock. When he fired his weapon, the missile tracked the false target while the real Felon slipped behind him like a shadow. "Meridian, this is Ghost Rider." Her voice came through the radio with the steady cadence of someone who had found her rhythm. 16 down, 7 left. They're learning to work together now, but it's too late for coordination. Captain Volkov's voice crackled through the Russian frequency, her words carrying the weight of desperation and growing respect. All units, close formation. We must support each other." But coordination required communication, and communication required trust. The surviving Russian pilots had watched their comrades die one by one, each death more impossible than the last. Trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. The 17th kill came when Nix executed what military historians would later call the Meridian Maneuver, a combination of thrust vectoring, electronic warfare, and pure pilot instinct that allowed her to engage two targets simultaneously. The twin explosions painted the sky with orange and black, their shockwaves visible from the ground. Jesus Christ, whispered Captain Torres from his holding position in the F-16. She's not just winning, she's making it look easy. But it wasn't easy. In the cockpit of the stolen Felon, Lieutenant Commander Ravencrest was pushing both herself and her aircraft to their absolute limits. The G-forces were crushing her into her seat, her flight suit soaked with sweat despite the aircraft's environmental systems. Her hands moved across the alien controls with the precision of someone who had paid for every lesson with blood and determination. The 18th Su-35 died when its pilot made the fundamental mistake of trying to be a hero. Senior Lieutenant Victor Kozlov, the younger brother of the pilot who had died 13th, attempted to avenge his sibling's death with a head-on attack that relied more on courage than tactics. Courage wasn't enough. The cannon burst that ended his life came from an angle that should have been impossible, fired by a pilot who had turned the laws of physics into suggestions and the rules of engagement into guidelines. Meridian Base, this is Ghost Rider. Her transmission carried a note of something that might have been regret. 18 down, 5 left. Tell their families they died as warriors. That has to count for something. The respect in her voice was genuine, and it reached across the language barrier to touch the hearts of the surviving Russian pilots. They were beginning to understand that they weren't just fighting an enemy. They were fighting someone who understood the cost of war in ways that their commanders never could. The 19th Russian aircraft exploded in a fireball that could be seen from the International Space Station, its pilot's final transmission a prayer that would have made his grandmother proud. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Sova Volkov, Captain Volkov's younger brother, had been flying on her wing when the missile that killed him came from an angle that defied comprehension. Dmitri, Captain Volkov's scream cut through the radio static like a blade through silk. "You killed my brother, you American witch." The response came through layers of electronic warfare and what sounded like the whisper of death itself. "Captain Volkov, this is Lieutenant Commander Nix Ravencrest. I've killed 18 good pilots today. Your brother was one of them. I'm sorry for your loss, but this ends when you decide it ends." The psychological warfare was as effective as the physical combat. The remaining 4 Russian pilots could hear the genuine remorse in her voice, could sense the weight of every life she had taken. But they could also hear something else, the absolute certainty of someone who had already accepted the price of victory. "Meridian, this is Ghost Rider." Her voice came through the radio with the professional detachment of someone reading a technical manual. 19 down, 4 left. They're going to try something desperate now. That's when people make mistakes. In the Meridian Control Tower, Colonel Harrison watched the engagement with the fascination of someone witnessing the birth of a new form of warfare. "Rodriguez," he said quietly, "how many missiles does she have left?" "Unknown, sir. The felon was loaded with a full complement of weapons, but she's been up there for over an hour. She has to be running low on everything." The 20th Su-35 died when its pilot attempted the impossible, a ramming attack that would have taken both aircraft out of the sky. But Lieutenant Commander Ravencrest had anticipated the desperation move, using the felon's advanced maneuvering systems to slip aside at the last second, while her cannon fire turned the attacking aircraft into expanding debris. "Meridian Base, this is Thunder Actual," Colonel Harrison's voice carried across the radio waves. "Ghost Rider, you have permission to disengage. You've done enough." The laugh that came through the static was bitter and beautiful, like the sound of wind through winter trees. "Thunder, this is Ghost Rider. I haven't done enough until they're all going home to their families. 3 left. Almost finished." Captain Volkov's voice crackled through the Russian frequency, her words carrying the weight of desperation and something that might have been admiration. "American pilot, I am Captain Elena Volkov. You have fought with honor that would make your ancestors proud. We offer you terms." The response came without hesitation. "Captain Volkov, I died 3 months ago. Dead women don't negotiate." The 21st Su-35 died in a manner that would haunt the nightmares of military pilots for decades to come. The aircraft simply disintegrated in midair, its pilot's last transmission cut short by the physics of high-velocity cannon fire meeting aluminum and steel. There had been no warning, no opportunity to eject, no final words of heroism or defiance. Lieutenant Commander Nix Ravencrest had become death incarnate, her stolen felon moving through the sky like a shadow given substance and purpose. The advanced fighter responded to her commands as if it were an extension of her own body, its systems pushed beyond their design limits by a pilot who had learned to think in 3 dimensions, while her enemies remained trapped in 2. "Meridian, this is Ghost Rider." Her voice came through the radio with the steady cadence of someone who had found peace in the heart of chaos. 21 down, 2 left. Captain Volkov, Senior Lieutenant Petrov, you have fought with honor. This doesn't have to end badly for everyone." The remaining Russian pilots were no longer fighting as military professionals. They were survivors, clinging to life in an environment that had become fundamentally hostile to their existence. Their aircraft, once symbols of technological superiority and national pride, had become little more than flying coffins in the hands of someone who understood their capabilities better than their own designers. Senior Lieutenant Alexei Petrov's voice crackled through the Russian frequency, his words carrying the weight of exhaustion and growing despair. "Frost, she's playing with us. She could have killed us 10 minutes ago. Captain Volkov's response was immediate and sharp. Hold formation, Volk. We die as Russian pilots, not as cowards. But Lieutenant Commander Ravencrest wasn't playing with them. She was giving them opportunities to disengage, to break off the attack and return to their base, with the knowledge that they had faced something unprecedented and lived to tell about it. The fact that they continued to press their attack spoke to their courage, their training, and their loyalty to a system that had sent them to die for political objectives they might not have understood. The 22nd kill came when Senior Lieutenant Petrov made the mistake of trying to use his aircraft's supermaneuverability to outturn the felon in a vertical climb. The Russian pilot was skilled, experienced, and brave, but he was also predictable. The burst of cannon fire that ended his life came from an angle that should have been impossible, fired by a pilot who had learned to see the sky as a three-dimensional chessboard. Meridian Base, this is Ghost Rider. Her transmission carried a note of something that might have been sadness. 22 down, 1 left. Captain Volkov, you're alone now, your choice. The silence that followed stretched across the radio waves like a physical presence. In the cockpit of her Su-35, Captain Elena Volkov stared at her radar screen and contemplated the mathematics of her situation. She was alone, low on fuel, and facing an opponent who had just demonstrated the ability to defeat 21 aircraft without taking a single hit. The professional soldier in her knew that continued engagement was suicide. The Russian officer in her knew that retreat was impossible. The human being in her knew that she was about to join her brother in whatever afterlife awaited pilots who died in the service of their country. "American pilot," she transmitted, her voice carrying the weight of final words. "I am Captain Elena Volkov, Russian Air Force. I have 1 missile left. You have made me an orphan and a widow. I will not disgrace my family's name by running." The response came through the static with the gentleness of a confessor speaking to a condemned criminal. "Captain Volkov, you have fought with honor. Your brother died as a warrior. That has to count for something." The final engagement lasted exactly 13 seconds. Captain Volkov fired her last missile with the precision of someone who had accepted death as the price of duty. The R-77 Adder streaked through the sky with mathematical certainty. Its guidance system locked onto the stolen felon's heat signature. But Lieutenant Commander Nix Ravencrest had been preparing for this moment since the engagement began. The countermeasures that defeated the incoming missile were a combination of electronic warfare, flares, and a maneuver that pushed the